everybody. This is KamehaRadio, a Dragon Ball podcast. Today we are going to be discussing Dragon Ball Daima's first ever episode has released today, as well as talking about all of the Spark and Zero hype that has been going on. My name is Alex, and I am joined by my co-host, David.
How's it going, everybody? Excited to be here.
So just a little bit of background. Me and David have been friends for roughly 20 years at this point. We were into a lot of the same stuff, Star Wars, Dragon Ball, anime in general, stuff like that. This has been a little bit of a talking point that we've had for a while, that we've wanted to kind of do something like this. And so I'm actually kind of happy that we're able to kind of come together and do something like this.
Yeah, it's definitely been a show in the making. We've been talking about it for probably a couple of months now. Alex is obviously more of a Dragon Ball fan than I am. I only got started into it probably when the first set of Fusion World came out. I've been a Dragon Ball fan growing up, but I think Alex has definitely thrown me into the fire with it a lot more.
Yeah, there's no escaping. There's no escaping my love and admiration for Dragon Ball. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely Dragon Ball's always been something that has stuck with me since childhood. It's not ever really left. I think there's probably been like lull points. I know like back in high school, I probably wasn't like as big on Dragon Ball as I was like as like a early teenager or like a 10-year-old that was getting into Dragon Ball from Toonami and stuff like that.
Yeah, we went from wanting to become Super Saiyans in our backyard to kind of just falling off, and then when we hit 30, back at it again.
At some point, it just culminates from sitting in the schoolyard and you try that 50th time to do the Kamehameha in the schoolyard, and then all the kids laugh, and you're just like, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. So you kind of take a step back and re-alter your priorities, and then you kind of, we just kind of rediscover it after a time. I mean, definitely when it came to Dragon Ball, like returning, like when Battle of Gods came out, was like a big thing that kind of got me back into it. I remember seeing that, and I was like, I saw the trailer for it, and I was like, we need to go see this in theaters. Like, when was the last time we saw anything back in 2013?
Yeah, I think when Super came out, that's kind of when we went to the movies. That's kind of when my interest re-peaked back into it. But I remember specifically it's like a core memory in my head when I was a kid, when Gohan taught Videl how to fly, and he had to like the orb, like you put the orb in his hand.
Oh yeah.
I remember I'd always try that. I was like, I gotta fly. I want to learn how to fly, and I always try to concentrate my energy into my hands, but to learn how to fly. But it never happened.
I think that's I think that's one of the things that I loved about Dragon Ball is like the application in terms of how they do stuff in the show. Like, it's so simple because Toriyama was always, which by the way, big rest in peace to Toriyama. We lost him earlier this year.
Shame.
And that was definitely, I know that hit me pretty hard, and I know that hit a lot of other people really hard. I don't know, how did that affect you in any way? Did that do anything for you when he passed?
Definitely sad to hear. I wasn't, like I said before, I wasn't a huge into Dragon Ball. So his relevance on my life, I didn't really know who he was. I didn't really know who like was behind the scenes making it. I wasn't that big of a fan, but kind of growing into it, and then hearing, as I'm reaching my heights of Dragon Ball, and then hearing that the creator passed away was kind of a big shame.
Yeah, and I can agree, and I can agree with that sentiment a little bit, just because again, like I think a lot of us probably did fall out of Dragon Ball at a certain time, and then we all kind of came back to it once it came back with Super. So I think when it came back with Super, when I re-jumped and went down that rabbit hole, I think I definitely went out of my way to kind of learn more about Toriyama and like what the man who created it was all about. I think being older, I think I could appreciate like that a lot more than I could when we were younger, and we just liked watching the cartoon. Yeah. But yeah, it definitely affected me in a big way when I heard about that. But yeah, so we figured that kind of wrapping this opening segment up, kind of wanted to at least talk about our experience with Dragon Ball a little bit, and at least kind of give an idea in terms of like where we're coming from when we go into later topics. And kind of do that. But yeah, so the podcast going forward is it's going to start off. Think of this as like season 1. It's going to be season 1 of the KamehaRadio podcast. We're going to be doing episodic reviews of every single Dragon Ball Daima episode as it airs. Obviously, the big hype thing right now is Sparking Zero. We're both avid Fusion World Dragon Ball Super card game Fusion World players. So as like new sets come out, and we can kind of discuss, you know, new card reveals and the whatnot. But and then obviously as we get past all of that and we kind of get back to more normalcy, we can kind of go into like generic topics of like oh, like I know like right now, David, you're rewatching GT, and it's
process.
It's a process. But like it will be we could dedicate like an episode to like our individual thoughts on GT. We can maybe do like, I haven't watched it in a long time, maybe a couple years, but we could do like a rewatch of like the original Dragon Ball, which would be
That is something yet I have to watch. I have not sat through all of Dragon Ball yet.
Yeah, that's a whole different beast. That's a whole it's I mean, obviously, like we grew up in the Z era, so for me anyway, nothing will ever beat Z, but there was something like so lighthearted and like different about OG Dragon Ball. Like I think you would probably like it. It kind of reawakens that sense of mysticism that like Dragon Ball, it was like always kind of known for when it first started. So that would be an interesting thing to do later. Yeah. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about the first episode of Dragon Ball Daima. But first, I do want to give it a little airtime because we obviously we got to talk about it. But Sparking Zero, man,
yes. Sparking
Zero. Like I mean, I've been waiting for this game since it was announced. And I mean, you could definitely give validation, but like I was sitting there like scratching my neck, like as if I was on something, and I'm just like, I need it. But no, what's your experience been with it so far? What have you been liking, disliking?
So I got the early release and played it day one. I haven't gotten. I'm in the middle of the Goku arc, and I did a couple of ranked matches. From what I remember from Budokai Tenkaichi 3, and how great of a game that was, I would say Sparking Zero it matches that as of right now, or maybe better. I would say better because we got more characters, we got updated graphics, game plays obviously smoother because of new engines and stuff like that. I really enjoyed like there's the little things like the first person views with like Goku and all the other characters. I love like and like they brought all the people back, most of the people back to do voiceovers, and just kind of the amount of work and dedication that got put into the game really shows and shines on how much of a good game I think it is so far.
Yeah, you could tell like just right out the gate with how much attention to detail and stuff that they did, that the people that worked on this game are Dragon Ball fans. Like they 100% went in with the expectation that like there is a very hardcore group of people that want a specific thing out of this game, and we need to make sure that we like deliver on that. Like it's Sparking Zero. I mean, I knew we all knew kind of what it was going into it. Like we knew it was going to be a direct successor to Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Even in the first trailer, they mentioned that Budokai Tenkaichi returns, and that was like a big selling point for the game. But I did not expect it to not only match that same type of energy from the previous game, but it excels at it bolsters everything up that came before. Like in just in its presentation is definitely the one thing I think that it did really well with. Like you mentioned like the first person mode, being able to see moments of like Goku's story from his perspective through his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was watching you the other night actually playing through the Cell Saga and seeing just seeing that scene of Goku teleporting Cell away, saying goodbye to all his friends and saying how proud he was of Gohan. Seeing that from his eyes and his perspective really just puts that whole aspect of that story into a completely different outlook.
Oh yeah, you're seeing it through Goku's eyes and almost feeling his feelings almost.
Yeah, it was a very like it was already like a sad moment in the show, but now it's like you're like that's almost like you're in his footsteps, and so you feel somber about it actually happening.
Yeah.
Because the way I always saw that scene was like you saw it in the anime, and your thoughts on what was going on TV reflected more of Gohan, because you were kind of putting yourself in Gohan's shoes when you're watching the series, and it's almost like you're saying goodbye to Goku. Whereas now with this first person perspective, it's almost like, I don't want to say it's like you're saying goodbye to your old self, because now we're older now. We're in Goku's shoes at this point for a lot of us. So it just hits different. Like it's almost like a weird coming of age in terms of just how we feel about that particular moment, which is really neat.
I would agree to that.
Yeah, I mean the controls have been like it's almost one for one in terms of how the game plays. I mean, obviously there's certain things that are different. There's certain things that are different. Obviously, they added new stuff into the game because they can't just port over gameplay from Budokai Tenkaichi 3 and call it a day. You have to elevate the gameplay to some extent. It's just like the new characters is obviously great. It's the first time we've gotten super representation in a video game like this. I mean, Kakarot, which was the last game that came out, I think. Kakarot, you had some super elements, like you had DLC for the Battle of Gods movie and the Resurrection F movie, and then obviously with like Fusion World, you have all the super representation like within the battle cards and the leaders and stuff like that. But like we've never had a true game that actually went through like aspects of the super storyline before, so that was a nice breath of fresh air to be able to experience that in like a game format. What were your thoughts on? There's been a big point of discussion. It's been a big point of discussion within Sparking Zero about Great Ape Vegeta.
I knew this was coming.
The Great Ape Vegeta fight, and how some of these fights are actually like perceived in the game. What was your experience with that?
So the funny thing is, going through those first couple missions, just on normal, I was like, this isn't that bad. Like, this is not that hard. Until you get to Great Ape Vegeta. I think I slapped my face against that boss probably like 8 times. To the point where I just had to cheese it. Just spear bomb. No, I couldn't. No, I don't even think you could have used your super, like your main super attack, or maybe I just wasn't. I was new and didn't know the controls all that well. But I was just Kamehameha over and over and over again. And then even if you got too close to him, he's going to use his explosive wave, and then like can't get too close to him. So it was definitely a fight.
I don't even remember either if I in any of my runs with that. It only took me 2 times to like finally beat him. So at least for me, like it was definitely a challenge, because the thing he always did for me was like he would just bum rush me. Like he would do like a 3-second charge, and then he would just zoom right up into my face, and I couldn't even have a second to even charge up myself to get those Kamehamehas off.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say go ahead.
No, well, from watching you, it seemed like you had a lot of trouble with the Ginyu Force.
Oh my god, that I mean I don't want to necessarily talk spoilers 100%, because I mean obviously the game only came out just today for some people, for non-early access players, so I don't want to necessarily spoil anything. I won't tell you where this is in the game, but there is a what if fight I won't go into full specifics of like how to get there and stuff, but there's one specific what if fight where you have to do a 1v5 of Goku. I think Goku early. It's 1v5 Goku versus the entire Ginyu Force. And it's literally like Guldo, Raccoon, Birder, Jeice, Ginyu, right? Like just all back to back to back, no stopping in between. And that fight was that took me like an hour and a half, almost 2 hours in total of just trying to figure out like that. Unlike the Grade 8 Vegeta fight, which you can cheese by just literally keeping your distance and just doing the Kamehameha into oblivion. There's no real way to like cheese the Ginyu Force fight. Like it is arguably like one of the hardest fights I've had in any of these Dragon Ball games. And that's mainly due to the fact that like, yeah, you need to act. It was like, you know how like in Dark Souls, right? You have games in Dark Souls, like the bosses are designed to gatekeep you in a sense to make sure that you know how you're supposed to approach the game. There's certain mechanics that happen in those types of games where sometimes you do just need to get walled until you get good at a very specific function. And that's what this felt like to me, was like I had to actually get good at the game and relearn some of the controls in order to give myself a better advantage in terms of surviving that 1v5 fight. And even like once I finally did beat it, it was still a close fight by the end of it. Like it was definitely not a fight for the faint of heart. That said though, like it's a lot of these fights just seem like I think a lot of it is just get good mentality. I think before the game even came out, there were a lot of players from like Budokai Tenkaichi 3 that like they saw Spark and Zero and they're like, oh, I'm going to get in there and I'm just going to trounce all the noobs. I'm going to know exactly what I'm doing. But the reality ended up being that like, I think the majority of us probably stopped playing Budokai Tenkaichi 3 back in the day, like maybe 4 years after the game came out. And like, we haven't touched a game like that since. And so,
yeah.
So I think it's nice that like the story mode in this game is like hard enough where it actually humbles a lot of the hardcore like Budokai Tenkaichi player base, and it really pushes us to actually do better and get better, because that's only ever going to reflect in the online aspect of Spark and Zero 2, which is really fun.
Yeah, definitely agree. But to on that point, as you said before, not to bring out any spoilers or anything, I think maybe it's a good time to. What were your thoughts on the first episode of the Daima?
So I mean, we're gonna talk about it in length. It's essentially a review, and I think it's important that in order to properly review what the episode or like what the series is doing, it makes sense in the context of knowing what happens in each episode. In terms of what that brings to the story as a whole. So, I mean, my thoughts on the first episode, it definitely was not what I was expecting going into the first episode. There was a lot of world building, and like world building is something that I don't want to say it's far and few in between when it comes to Dragon Ball. But like usually when we get world building in Dragon Ball, it's usually kind of like sprinkled in over time. It's not in like, usually you're kind of when something new is introduced, it's usually like given to you. And then like, that's the standard going forward. Like it's not something that like ever evolves. It's like, okay, like this is something new. It's something cool and different and interesting. And then that's it. That's usually what the train of thought with Dragon Ball has always been, at least for me. And not to say you can't grab things from that little bit of information you're given, but a lot of it does tend to leave more questions than answers. With this first episode, I was really surprised because it was literally just lore drop after lore drop after lore drop the whole episode. And I love that kind of shit. I love being involved in a story that gives you so much context to the point that you don't know what to do with it. So I thought that was really cool. A lot of there was a couple of like twists in terms of established lore, and we'll get into like the breakdown of the episode. But there was like twists in the established lore that actually genuinely left me a little surprised. And then like all the new characters that they introduced, they're all very fun. They all bring a certain dynamic that we've already kind of seen in pre-established characters before, but it like elevates it to a degree.
Yeah.
But so I mean, in terms of like in terms of a first episode, I think it's solid for what it was trying to do. There might be like maybe a little bit of expectation. I thought there would be a little bit more. I don't want to necessarily say action, because going into a first episode, I don't expect like action to be like at the forefront. But I was definitely expecting probably a little more from the episode. But all in all, I think it was actually a pretty solid episode.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say my initial thoughts were basically the same. Very beautiful show, I'll say. Like
It was the art direction was really nice. Yeah.
yeah. Like you said, just like lore fact after lore fact, introducing new characters that like, whoa, I didn't know this person existed, or like this person has is related to this person. And yeah, there wasn't a lot of action, but I think you're right, because it is just the first episode, so we're basically just establishing characters at this point, and just kind of seeing how this is all going to play out. I definitely ended with a lot more questions
Yeah.
than answers in this first episode, which is to be expected. But I guess let me ask you this: well, your first initial, like that opening where they introduced, like basically just went over Goku's background and his history and brought all that in, and then what did you think of that? Did you think that was a good little ad there, like, as a review?
I mean, as someone who's like seen everything and has been involved as much as I have with Dragon Ball, it's nothing new to me. The presentation of it was great. Like it was very like it basically focused more on Goku as a character rather than like what he's done in the series, which I think is good, because I think for a series that's definitely going to be focusing a lot on Goku as a main character again, I think it is important to kind of know like who Goku is as a character. So while there might have been like certain things that I would have liked for them to kind of say about Goku to kind of give like new viewers, for example, like the opening for new viewers is great. For people who may not have seen the original Dragon Ball, for people who may not know everything about Dragon Ball Z, I think that it was more meant for those types of viewers. And I think that's definitely needed. But in terms of what it was trying to do, like I thought it was really well done. Like presentation was great. The pacing at which they were talking about him was great. I probably would have liked just a little bit more, invocation of who Goku is as a character, but I mean that's more of a little nitpick than anything else.
Yeah, I'll agree to that.
And going back to like the presentation and like art direction, like you could tell, like I know you're not like, you haven't like read the manga of like original Dragon Ball and Z and stuff like that. You did like I know you did like a rewatch of like the Super manga.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know if you could feel that difference between like what you saw in like Super, and like Z and how that translates to what Daima looks like. But like it really reflected off of Toriyama's like original art style. And that really goes to show that like that alone goes to show like how much involvement Toriyama actually had in this series. I think it's really cool that, I mean, unfortunately, as far as we know, it's the last thing that he's gonna have worked on, and I'm glad that like that level of excitement for him, because he's talked about how excited he was to work on something like this and to be involved in something like this with Dragon Ball again. which for those listening that may not necessarily realize, is that Toriyama was always for lack of a better word, he was always a lazy writer. He always went, the way that he structured his story was always like on a whim, and he wrote things as he went and did things as he went. Like Super Saiyan was something that was introduced because he was tired of coloring in Goku's hair every time. like that was the kind of mindset that like he went in with some of these with some of these stories and some of these characters and stuff like that. Like I remember like Cell was something that he always hated to draw because of all of the level of detail for like all the dots on his character design and stuff like that. And there's a reason that like second form Cell is like his favorite version of Cell. But he's bulkier. He's bulkier. He's not as spotty. He's got more features to him than the slender first form or third form. So to see like that level of like attention to detail and how in its presentation, I think is really well done. And I think just for that alone, I think Daima will probably end up spanning the test of time just because of the amount of involvement that he had.
Yeah, and I'll say I definitely saw the difference between the graphic and the artwork between Daima and Super. Just in that first, like right after the Goku crawl, and they introduced the demon world like citadel area, and just how dark and ominous and it looked.
Yeah.
Like even like his you could tell there was like a manga kind of concept to it, because it looked like it was kind of raining, and like the rain was bouncing off the little citadel area, but kind of still staying there, like it was like a drawing, which I thought was really cool. And then they kind of went into that citadel where we meet the first two characters, and it kind of had that super graphic to it, but also its own little standalone thing as well.
Like it felt polished.
Yeah,
like it's definitely polished in terms of how it's shown. Which we know Super's like whole development was very it was very unconventional in terms of how they did that, because it was a weekly anime that went on for 3 years. It was like 3 years, 2015 to 2018. And like they had a time constraint in terms of like how they had to get those episodes out, because it was airing on TV every single week. And so you could tell, at least it's fixed now, like in DVDs and Blu-rays and stuff like that. Like they fixed a lot of the early like art design and art direction in those first couple episodes, but it was really rough those first couple episodes. And it wasn't until like the tail end of like the Resurrection F arc that they redid that like they started to fix that a little bit, but even then it was still choppy at places. So yeah,
you can definitely tell they took their time, and because they had the time to do it, so they put in the work it deserved.
I wish I had the like the data or the statistics to know like how long Daima's actually been like worked on. Like we know, like based off the level of polish that we've seen, we know that it's been worked on for a long time. I think I've heard from other channels. I'm totally not Mark, I think, is one that pops right into my head. But I think there was talks or mentions that Daima has been worked. Its production has been a 2-year production.
Yeah.
Which for a serialized series like this is very uncommon. You don't see that type of effort being put into something like this. And I don't know how much of that is reflected on the prior knowledge that initially I think this was supposed to be a web series. It wasn't meant to be an official series. And what I mean by web series is probably something more akin to like Dragon Ball Heroes, I guess.
Okay.
It's like Dragon Ball Heroes was strictly just a promotional material for the arcade game in Japan. But they were shorter stinted episodes that lasted maybe 10-15 minutes each. Whether a Daima was going to actually be that or not, I don't know if I can necessarily say. I don't have all the details or all the information, but the fact that they'd shifted it from that to like this, I think was probably a really good move.
Mhm.
And who that may have came from the fact that like that Toriyama may have been dealing with some like health issues. Maybe he wanted to give a last hurrah in Daima. Like I don't know. Again, I don't have all the details. I'm more or less just like interjecting my own thoughts into it. But yeah. So let's kind of talk about what happened in this first episode, since we kind of talked about how our thoughts on it. But so we open up, like you said, to the opening crawl of Goku, of introducing Goku and friends and what they in like their starting journey. And then they kind of talked about going into like they roughly mentioned like all their major fights in Z with Frieza, Cell, and Boo.
Yep.
So clearly the show takes place the show, and that's where the opening stopped. So clearly the show takes place directly after the Majin Buu fight. We are introduced to the Demon Realm, which I think is a really cool setting, by the way.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
The Demon Realm was introduced with Deborah in the Majin Buu saga, and that was in like we talked about like Dragon Ball and how like world building is like it's like you're given a piece of information and then like that's it. Like you may hear something about it later, you may not. So the fact that we're even getting anything about because back in the Buu saga, that was always like a thought that I always had in my head was like, Deborah's from the Demon Realm. What's the Demon Realm? What is that? What does that place look like? What happens there? And we just never got that. So the fact that like this is our opening setting, it's our opening introduction to the series, and it's in a place that was mentioned before but never really talked about, is really, really cool.
Because I always know whenever I heard Deborah being part like the king of the demon realm, I always just assumed, oh, he's just the king of hell, basically.
Yeah.
Within that universe.
Yeah, and I mean in Toriyama fashion, that is a very simple way of just of introducing a character. Very simple. Like that. Like this is all you need to know about him, and that's it. So I mean the Demon Realm itself looked really cool. It seemed very foreboding. Very. I don't want to necessarily say like evil because it didn't really scream evil to me.
No.
But like it definitely seemed like it was darker. It was definitely like maybe a bit more sinister just in the way like the building design of like that fortress was like that you mentioned was really cool. So we're introduced to the Demon Realm, and we're also introduced to a bunch of new characters just right out the gate. Yeah. We're introduced to Goma, which we know very little about Goma. He's a very small, impish looking dude. He kind of gives me some like Babidi vibes, but he's not quite Babidi. He's definitely got to me it seems like he's got more of like a sorcerer type look than a wizard look to him. Mm-hmm. And then we're also introduced to his assistant, Dagesu. And it turns out Dagesu is the Supreme Kai or Shin's brother. There's a relation there.
Yeah, that took me by surprise.
So, which I mean, it's not unbeknownst of Dragon Ball to introduce a character and like just in juxtaposition information into the world. Like there was no aforementioned, there was nothing mentioned by Shin that he had siblings. So like this just being out of the blue is definitely surprising. It's very Toriyama in terms of story design, character design. And what they're doing is they're sitting in this throne chamber and they're watching a live feed of the Majin Buu saga going down. Like they're seeing it happen in real time. Or at least that's what it appears to be. It could have been like a highlight reel, but it seemed like it was like happening in real time just based off their reactions.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure if it was in real time or if they were just kind of like, maybe this is my initial thought, like maybe they found out something happened to Deborah and he wasn't like, he hadn't come back because they mentioned that the people in the demon realm don't visit the outside world. So yeah, Deborah obviously left, and they knew of Babidi, so they were like kind of what happened to Deborah, and then after probably they went back and looked probably slightly after the Buu saga ended, and they're kind of just like, what is going on here? And then that's after Dabur died. Uh, that's when Shin's brother. I'm gonna mess up their names, so I'm not even gonna
The Gesu.
try. Dagesu, yeah.
Yeah.
Was like, hey, Goma, you're now the king of the demon realm. So he must have been his Dabur's second hand.
Yeah. And it would be interesting to see. I mean, I'm sure we'll get a little bit more as the series goes in, but it seems like there's a lot more going on in the demon realm than we initially perceived. Not just because of these characters' involvement, but because like obviously there was a connection between Goma, Dagesu, and Dabura to some extent.
Yeah.
So who's to say? But yeah, so they're going through and they're rewatching all the highlight reel of what happened in the Majin Buu saga. They're blown away by the idea of the Saiyans and the power that they actually wield. And they made a very interesting comment. About, and maybe I'm a little ahead. I think it was more mentioned when they were talking about the Dragon Balls later on. But they mentioned something about light magic. Or white magic. So like I'm like a big Final Fantasy fan. So like hearing the concept of like white mage, black mage, like that kind of stuff, like being introduced into Dragon Ball is very interesting because we knew that Babidi, like obviously magic has always been a thing. We know that Babidi has his own like version of magic. We know that Majin Buu has his own version of magic. We know that Moro, in the super manga has his own version of magic. So like magic isn't like a new concept in Dragon Ball. It's just very limiting in terms of what we do know. But now we're being introduced to concepts of, okay, well, there's two different types of magic that can exist. Which I think is a really neat way to kind of like really expand like the type of like abilities that characters are able to have. In a franchise like Dragon Ball, which I think is really cool.
And go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
What kind of also struck me as like, hey, these people don't get out very much is
that's a way to it's like, like traveling like outside the demon realm is like frowned upon. Like it's like it's not looked too kindly upon by doing so. And it seems like you need like special permission to be able to leave.
Yeah.
Who in terms of who does that, I have no idea. They didn't really. And who is like the guy manning the security gate for that. but yeah, like
what I was saying was just because they don't leave very much is they were looking at like Goku and Vegeta and Gohan, and like they were like, oh, they're shooting light beams out of their hands, and obviously not knowing what ki is and going back to their magic, and they're like, are they Majin? And they're like, no, look at the ears. So
that
is a Majin like a race in the demon realm? Like, are there more Buu like people, or is it like they're their own race? That's gonna be something I'm interested in finding out.
Because we always assumed that Majin just referred to like Majin Buu, or like whatever species that the Majin Buu is, like the Majin race or something like that. Like that's how I always perceived it. And I mean, you can't really look outside at like supplemental material, like the video games and stuff like that. But like you have, Xenoverse, and you have Xenoverse, and you have where a lot of that stemmed from, which was the Dragon Ball Online, which was an MMO in Korea back in the day, where a playable race was the Majin race, and so they always defaulted that as like Buu's species.
Yeah.
So I always just assumed it was that, but now they're kind of making it seem like, because you could tell that there's a distinction between Majin and then how they refer to Majin Buu. Like the way it kind of came off is that Majin isn't the same as what Majin Buu is. So it's a matter of what does that, like you said, what does that imply?
Yeah, what's the distinction?
Yeah, so that is a very interesting point that you brought up. I didn't really sit and think about that until you said it. So yeah, they go through. So they go through and they're watching all the highlights from the Majin Buu saga, and then they're worried. And like you said, Degasu decides that by proxy, because Deborah was slain, that Goma is now like the new supreme demon king of the demon realm. And then they start worrying about well, what if these strong individuals who beat Majin Buu, what if they end up coming here?
Yeah.
And that's when Dr. Arinsu enters. She's a scientist of sorts. We don't have a full scale of what she like works on and what type of scientific study she does. We know Deborah funded a lot of her research. And that she's trying to advocate for more funding from Goma, who's now in that position of power. But we don't really know much about her other than she's a scientist in the demon realm and that she is Degesu and I'm assuming the sibling dynamic is the same as it would be here, but Degesu mentions her as sister. So is that a matter of like they're actually siblings and so by proxy Shin also has a sister, or is that maybe like a title or distinction separate? Like is it like his sister just the way he addresses her?
Yeah.
Is it like separate, like is it like separate family groups? And Shin and Degesu are related, but like Dr. Arinsu is like a stepsister or like a half sister or something. Like who knows? But yes, they're introduced there, and they start having a discussion about like, well, what would happen if these people came here? And so Goma has this idea of wishing on the Dragon Balls to stop that from happening. But they make mention that first off, there's Dragon Balls in the Demon Realm too. So that all, like, it's not surprising at all that there's another place in the whole universe, the whole grand scope of things in Dragon Ball. There's yet another set of Dragon Balls that's given to us.
The show's like Oprah.
It's like you get Dragon Ball, you get Dragon Ball,
you get Dragon Ball. Everyone gets Dragon
Balls. So, but it seemed, but yeah, so it's, but they say that, but they mentioned the Tamagami, which are like these. They mentioned the Tamagami, which are these weird. They're like they're almost robotic looking in a way, but they also kind of have like insect features too. But they're like knights that I guess that are overseeing and protecting the Dragon Balls within the demon realm. So we'll learn a little bit more into them as the series goes in, and we can maybe do some theory crafting based off future information we'll talk about. But yeah, so they have the wicked idea of going to Earth, stealing the Earth's Dragon Balls, and then stealing the Earth's Dragon Balls, and then coming back and then wishing to eliminate them, but they can't, because they say they can't because the Dragon Balls in their world may be using white magic versus the black magic that the Dragon Balls in the Demon Realm use. So they may not operate in the same capacity. They think that a wish like that can't happen.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So then they have the idea of, well, let's make them children. Let's make them so weak to the point where we know that they won't be a problem for us down the road.
Yep.
Which is smart. I mean, you're the one that watched GT. Is that a better use of turning? Would that be a better use of turning Goku in terms of like a story beat? Like, is that better to use that as like reasoning instead of how GT did it with the Pilaf gang? Like what are your thoughts?
I think that is a better route to take if you're going to turn Goku into a child, because in GT, Pilaf just accidentally turns like, I wish you were a kid. Turns into a kid, never see Pilaf again. He's gone. He's like, that's it. But now with Kana and Daima, like, we have a motive behind it. But we've all, if you've watched GT, you've seen how Goku is as a child. He's not much different. So I think they're going to be in for a little more than they bargained for.
Yeah.
In future episodes.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about? Why don't you talk about Neku?
Neku. That's the Namekian, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. That was very. I was very kind of blown away by that because when he came out, I'm like, what is it like? Well, let me take a step back here.
okay, yeah,
During the review of the Majin Buu saga, like they didn't know who anybody was, and they except kind of like the Majin, and then they're like they showed Piccolo, and then they're like, oh, it's a Namekian. Like they know about Namekians, but they don't know about humans. So like, what's the correlation there?
yeah.
And then kind of we got introduced to the Namekian who made the Dragon Balls in the Demon Realm, and he's an older guy, been there for thousands of years.
That blew my
Um,
mind because like
yeah.
we know Namekians have a longer lifespan than I think other races in Dragon Ball, but like the fact that he lived for thousands of years seemed like it was a little far fetched. Like it seemed crazy.
Well, if you kind of listen to Goma when they got to the lookout,
Yeah, they
he's
mentioned. Yeah, they
yeah
mentioned.
he
Yeah, that
mentioned
they
he's
would extend his life.
I'm gonna add 1,000 more years to your life if you agreed to do this. But it was great when they got to the lookout and he saw Dende sitting. He's like, I haven't seen like a Namekian in thousands of years, and they mentioned like that's where your race originates from, the demon realm. So the Namekians apparently didn't start on Namek. They started in the demon realm.
Yeah,
So that's something I'm interested in
yeah. Which
hearing about.
because throughout the whole franchise, like we know that we obviously knew there was Kami and Piccolo, who used to be one being on Earth. They got sent from the planet Namek to escape some sort of catastrophe that happened on old Namek. And we know that the Namekians lived on Namek as well. We also know that there's Namekians in Universe 6. So Namekians are, so that we have that, and then in the super manga we have oh god, what's the Namekian's name in the Granola arc?
Oh yeah, I can't remember.
Oh
I
god,
just do it too.
but yeah, there was the Namekian in the Granola arc on Planet Cereal. That I love the naming convention. I'll always love the naming convention.
Granola.
Yeah, granola cereal. But like then we have him. And I think there's been like some talks. There's been like discussions I've seen that like Namekian, like I think the initial point of theory was that Namekians are the ones that probably ended up like creating the universes. I think there was talks about that before.
Yeah.
From other creators and other people that do like what ifs and stuff like that. But that was always like a point of information that like, where do the Namekians come from? Like where, like they have all this power and they're able to create these wish granting orbs. Like even think about like the Super Dragon Balls.
Yeah.
Like the ones that encompass all of Universe 6 and 7, and they're like the size of planets. Like who created those? Like there's so much mystery around the Namekians. Just based off of all of the things that we knew. And now that we know that we now have confirmation that they originate from the demon realm. Or at least they're originally from the demon realm. They could have came from somewhere before then too. Who knows? But I thought that was a really interesting piece of information that was just dropped on us.
Yeah, and you brought up how there were Namekians in Universe 6, which kind of explains like because Universe 6 is a parallel universe, Universe 7, but in the show in Daima they mention when they're going to the lookout, they're like, hey, which universe are we going to? Like Universe 7. So it's almost as if the demon realm exists outside of, I guess, the universal realm.
Yeah, it's
kind of maybe where Zen, maybe like kind of how Zenu's palace is.
Yeah. Like it's its own plane of existence.
Yeah.
And that would definitely explain that like we can't really say for sure when it comes to like the actual Namekians, and then like the one Namekian on Planet Cereal. Like maybe he was someone else that also escaped the cataclysm on Namek too, just like Piccolo did. Or it could also be that like through Daima, we now know that like, yeah, like these Namekians like have access to every universe that we know of. So that 100% explains like the Namekians in Universe 6.
Yeah.
But would that also explain like how what's his face on Planet Serial got to where he's at? Because they had to like specify to get out of the demon realm like where they wanted to go. It was like, okay, so they're like, yeah, we're trying to go into the other world. Okay, where? What universe? Okay, universe 7. All right. And then they ask like coordinates, like where specifically.
Yeah.
And they're like Earth, I guess. Like it's like so it's almost like, yeah, it's like a network of tunnels that can take them to anywhere they see fit.
My question is, why did they want to leave the demon realm? What was the point for the mass exodus? Like, did they maybe just didn't want to be there anymore, or was there a cataclysm or like a inquisition to the Namekians in the demon realm? Like, why were they trying to leave?
Yeah, because I mean, you could look at Neku's situation and you could almost surmise, because Neku is also the one that created the Tamagami, which are the ones that protect the Dragon Balls.
Yeah.
They're the robotic knight looking characters, and you could almost make an argument that it could be a couple things. So it could be like you said, like an inquisition, or some sort of mass takeover from the demon kind of some sort that provoked the Namekians to leave the demon realm. And it seems to me, and you could agree or disagree, but it seems like Neku is almost like being kept against his will, like willingly, yeah. like he's willingly staying. He may not necessarily have a choice, but it seems like maybe he's like he created the Tamagami to protect the Dragon Balls from people in the demon realm that might use it for evil. And then, but because he is the sworn protector of those Dragon Balls, if he is in like indentured servitude to Goma and potentially Deborah before then, like he's obviously got to go along for the ride. He's in servitude because like without him there is no Dragon Balls. So
yeah,
for him, like he probably knows like nothing will happen to him because they need him. They need him in case they can get a hold of the Dragon Balls, but he's also doing what he can to make sure that it doesn't ever come to that either. So it's almost like a stalemate between the two. And he's old as fuck now. So so at this point, like you saw how he entered, like he just had like the most laid back expression on his face. And so he's probably just going along for the ride at this point. He's pretty much accepted his status and what he's doing. That's how I see him. I don't know if you see him the same way or not.
I'm gonna make a prediction, and like I'm gonna say the demon realm wasn't always the demon realm, because look at the Namekians, they're very peaceful people, right? And like they don't want to fight unless they kind of have to fight. So I'm predicting that the demon realm was probably had a bunch of different races that kind of lived peacefully, and then you mentioned it like there was a demon possibly like a demon takeover. Like Deborah's father maybe was the one that kind of rose up.
Yeah, they did mention his father, which was interesting. Yeah.
And kind of took over the demon realm and, claimed the throne for himself. And then that's that's probably why like the Namekians were persecuted and had to leave. And that's just kind of my prediction.
Or maybe it's all a massive tie-in into Sandland. Because sorry about that. We had a little bit of technical difficulties. Random Discord crash, but it just is what it is. No, I was saying, like for all we know, it's a tie-in into Sandland because Beelzebub's father looks a lot like Deborah in terms of his design, and that could just be a Toriyama mannerism, and I'm just memeing at this point, but it's very possible. It could always be a possibility to like interconnect everything. Who knows? But yeah, no, I think that can you imagine how crazy that would be if like your prediction right there like ended up being like on the nose, and we're just in episode 1. like all the surprises gone. we knew from day 1. So so then they go they go through the portals and they start making their way to Earth to get the Earth Dragon Balls. Cut to Earth, and we're reintroduced to the gang. Everybody's having a party at Capsule Corp because anytime we have any new Dragon Ball property or series or season or something, there's always a party at Bulma's house.
Party, yep.
Always a party. But it's for Trunks' birthday. He turns 9 that day. So they're all celebrating and having a good time. They're all having a good time. There was some talk they brought up again. I find it really funny that they have to keep hammering this fact home from Superhero because it's just so funny to me because like there's always a mention of like, oh, you've grown a lot since the last we saw you, or like no, you haven't aged all that much despite being your age. And then like there was a conversation between Krillin and Trunks, and Krillin was like, you're 9 years old, you haven't grown all that much. And then Trunks is like, look at yourself. Like you're not much different. And then Goku makes mention of like, oh well, Saiyans have a massive growth spurt when they turn 15. Which was meant.
Then he took a stab at Vegeta. He's like, I don't think Vegeta really made it there.
Yeah, Vegeta. It's like, you trying to start a fight. But it's funny that we have to keep making that we have to keep mentioning that piece of information because it was mentioned in Superhero by Gohan when Piccolo asked about it.
Yeah.
He's like, I barely recognize Goten and Trunks. And he's like, oh yeah, like we stay really small until at some point we're just not. It's like, so yeah, that was funny to see. And then Goku notices that this is my biggest detractor from this episode. And it probably is for you too. But Goku ends up seeing Supreme Kai and Kibito at the party. Yeah. And they're like, and he asked what they're doing there. And obviously they said like they were here on business or for whatever reason. And then Goku makes mention of they're separated. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until he mentioned that I was like, wait a minute, didn't this already happen in Super? Like this already happened. So in Daima, they mentioned that when Vegito was absorbed by Butanks, or Buhan, that they ended up breaking up and they split from the Potara fusion. And so they utilized they figured that maybe that was like an innate ability that Majin Buu had. And since they've now befriended Majin Buu, they would utilize that to separate themselves. So after we watched the episode, I went back and I looked up two different sources. I looked up the Super manga and I looked up the Super anime to make sure that I didn't like misunderstand or anything like that. In Super, it is the episode where they arrive at the nameless planet during the Universe 6 tournament. Where they are reintroduced for the first time in Super to Shin and Kibito. And they make the exact same comment of like, hey, the last time we saw you guys, you refused. What happened? And they mentioned in Super that they went to Planet Namek and asked Purunga to separate them. And so right there's already a difference.
Yeah.
So we went back and checked again and used the manga because because my idea was, it was actually brought up to you. It was brought up by you. You mentioned to look into the manga. Because my thought was like, okay, well, Daima is like an anime strict property. Like it's anime only, no manga. So, and Super was the exact same way. The manga was just a separate piece that every now and then followed the story of the anime. So you were like, check the manga, see if it's the same there. So I went to chapter 7 of the manga, and it's a much smaller conversation, but the same thing is said in the manga as well in chapter 7. And it's that they use the Namekians to wish them back to be separate. So now this is maybe my only concern in terms of Dragon Ball going forward. Not necessarily the series of Daima itself, but like just going forward. Because this is such a massive retcon. That's I don't want to say it. I don't know if it was overlooked or if they just didn't do the proper diligence and just we're just going in a different direction. Like, because now that like we have the separated canon in terms of anime and manga, like now we have both animes saying two vastly different reasons to why they separated.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, retcons aren't necessarily they're not necessarily like a bad thing.
No.
There's a lot of stuff that has a lot of retcons and a lot of stuff that, like, I'll use for example, like the Warhammer universe is filled with retcons.
Yeah.
But they still make it work. I don't think this is a huge deal that it's gonna be earth shattering, but it's kind of something that's like, oh, like what's the I like to have my stuff clean, and because I'm a very simple person, I like to know what's going on.
Yeah, like it is what it is,
but,
and yeah,
but I don't think it's earth shattering, but it's still kind of like
like the way to me it's the matter of, I mean, for me anyway, the biggest issue is the fact that the rights of Dragon Ball right now are like all over the place. You have Shueisha, you have Toei, you have Bird Studio, which is, I believe Bird Studio is Toriyama's like studio. That's like his thing. And now we have the Capsule Corporation, Japan. And they're all doing their own separate things. Like there's a reason like the video games, there's a reason like the anime hasn't come back for Super yet, and it's because Shueisha, is it Shueisha? I could be completely wrong in terms of the structure of everything here, so bear with me bear with me and just try to grasp where I'm coming from here. But like whoever owns the anime hasn't come back yet because the people that do the manga have separate rights to that story. So in order for like the Moro and the Granola and the Black Frieza stuff to come to anime format, needs to go through a bunch of hurdles in terms of licensing to be able to do so. The reason you don't see manga characters in a lot of the video games, Dragon Ball Legends, Dokkan Battle, even Sparking Zero, and even like the card game Infusion World, like you don't see anything from the Moro Granola arc there either. So like you have your anime licensing, you have your manga licensing, and then you have your merchandise and video games and everything else like on the side there. So, and that leads into the bigger issue for me, which is the fact that we have two completely different sets of continuity in Dragon Ball, which is strictly the anime and then strictly the manga. And we don't count video games because video games have always done their own thing, like regardless. You can go back however many years of Dragon Ball video games. The Dragon Ball video games have never interjected anything canon into the main stories. But we have two separate continuities, and it would be one thing, I think, for me. I think it wouldn't be as big of a deal for me. And I wouldn't necessarily consider this a big deal now, because for all we know, something will happen in the series. Maybe Kibito and Shin will fuse again for some reason. And then, the stuff, what's said in Super will still have to happen. They still have to wish on the Namekian Dragon Balls too. Like there's still room for correction. My issue is just that, like, and it would be a much different issue too if this was manga versus anime. If the information was split in a completely different light between the two, but because the information that's given to us is both from anime sources and it's conflicting information, that's where I kind of have a problem with it. And I mean, we can maybe make the argument that because it's also mentioned in the manga, that's the true canon, that's because it happens in both anime and manga, that they were separated by the Namekians, that's what actually happened, and that whatever happens in Daima here is not canon. I have no idea. This is canon. Like canon is very weird in like every franchise, because of stuff like this.
And I'm sure we're not gonna be the only ones that are gonna recognize that. And I'm sure there's a lot of people are gonna come out and be like, "Hey, what's going on here? What's the real thing? What's the real thing?" And then I don't know if they're gonna come out and say something. Probably not, knowing the IP. But well, yeah, like you said, maybe it's not maybe it's something that'll get course corrected in a
Yeah.
future season.
Yeah, nothing's set in stone as of right now. It is something that might need to be addressed before Daima ends, because this is like a one shot. Like we're getting 20 plus episodes, and like that's it. There won't be a season 2 or anything
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. So if that is going, if we are going to make that change, then something's going to have to get corrected down the line. Otherwise, it's going to be, because I mean, thinking about it, is there really like anything massive in terms of, I mean, the Vegito, I guess Vegito and how Vegito happens is retconned. And I wouldn't say that necessarily broke anything. Because Majin Buu Saga, Vegito fused, and they said it was going to be a permanent fusion, but they they didn't specifically specify that like it's like it's only permanent for Supreme Kais, right?
Yeah.
So that retcon like is like a very it's an easy fix. It's definitely,
and I think they did fix that in Super, because
yeah,
they said unless you're a Supreme Kai, the fusion only lasts for an hour. Was it?
yeah, it was like an hour. So it was like it was an oversight. You could easily look at that and it's like an oversight from Shin back in the Buu saga. Like maybe like, yeah, like it is permanent, but like he just forgot to mention that it's permanent for Supreme Kais. That type of fusion never happened for like mortals before. So like that,
Yeah.
So like that was probably a whole new thing for them too. But yeah, I mean, we'll just have to wait and see. That was just very interesting to me.
Yeah.
that we had like something in terms of like conflicting information kind of given to us there, which was interesting.
Yeah.
So we saw the party, we had that whole conversation, and then we get back to the lookout. The demon crew arrives and they meet up with Dende, and Popo makes an appearance.
Yeah, you haven't seen him in a minute.
I can't recall if there was ever a time where I saw him in Super. It's been so long since I rewatched Super, but
I don't think so. Don't believe so. I could be wrong. Anyone in the chat, just drop if you've seen him.
If you're listening to this on YouTube, leave a comment down below and feel free to not only give your own opinions, but also like you can course correct us on certain information too if you need to. It's all about discussion here. But yeah, so they arrive at the lookout. Popo makes a great appearance. And then they decide they ask to use the Dragon Balls on Earth. Dende says no, essentially. And then they order Neku to go and locate the Dragon Balls for him. And my initial thought was like, well, he doesn't have a radar or anything. How in the world? How is he going to do that? But he used some semblance of magic, or something of the like, anyway. And he was able to not only sense that the balls were inert, but he was also able to sense where each individual one was, and then also recall the Dragon Balls to his location, and also make them active again.
Yeah,
which is really strong. Is that a? Do you think that's something that like he specifically is able to do? Do you think that has something to do with the origins of the demon realm, or do you think like maybe because he's thousands of years old that he has that ability? Like,
so it's something we've obviously never seen before in the Dragon Ball universe. Having a Namekian just summon the Dragon Balls at will, even at an inert state.
Because it's not even like Mori on Namek was able to do that with Earth's Dragon Balls.
Yeah.
It's not like Kami or Piccolo or Dende on Earth are able to do that with the Namekian Dragon Balls. So,
but if he is of like demon realm origin, like, then he might, and considering how old he is, he probably has learn some abilities, and have a special connection with the Dragon Balls to be able to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's kind of my thought on it. I guess we'll probably learn more about it in future episodes.
Yeah. So, I mean, so that was interesting. Dende tried to stop them from activating the Dragon Balls, but Dagesu like karate chopped Dende in the neck and sent him flying. And I was a little, and maybe it's just, maybe because Shin is so useless as a character to me, but like I looked at Dagesu and I'm like, oh, he's Shin's brother. There's no way he could be like that strong, but like, and maybe there's a little bit of Dragon Ball Abridged that's like interjecting into my thought process too. But like Popo just sat there. Like Popo, like in original Dragon Ball, like Popo was really strong. Like you could make the argument that like Popo was probably like the strongest fighter on Earth at the time, before Demon King Piccolo and stuff. Like before all of that happened at the end of the original Dragon Ball. Because he just outpaced Goku in training in every possible way. So like the fact that he just kind of stood there and didn't do anything, I was like, huh. I was like I would have figured Popo would do a little bit more to protect Dende than just run up to him and make sure he's okay. But
I mean, even in the Z Saga, I remember an episode. I think it was either Goten or Trunks. I can't remember. I guess they either started chasing Popo or like we're kind of fighting him, and Popo was just blocking everything. He was just like, well, this is nothing to me. I can't remember if they were Super Saiyan or not at the time.
Yeah.
Like Popo, he's got some moves.
Yeah. Like, and I mean, like, that's a great example because like, yeah, Popo, I think is extremely underrated. And it's the fact that like, and you take that specific example where he's helping Goten and Trunks spar to like get ready for them to like learn fusion and stuff like that, I guess. If I remember what you're talking about correctly. Yeah. But like you got to think Goten and Trunks at that point in the story are like leaps and bounds stronger than Kid Goku was back in Dragon Ball. So if Popo is able to like keep up with like Super Saiyan children, to the point where like they're not even able to land a punch on him, how strong is Popo? So like I feel like in that moment Popo probably could have done more to maybe prevent that. But I mean Popo has always been more of a side character anyway. He outside of OG Dragon Ball and maybe that one stint in, I don't know if that stint in Majin Buu Saga was filler or not.
I can't remember.
I might have to reread the manga and just see. I don't think Popo had a whole lot of relevance outside of OG Dragon Ball though. So maybe they just went with the mentality of that. And what you mentioned might just be filler, but I mean, still, I feel like he should have done more than just run up to Dende and like hold him and just make sure he was fine. I don't know.
You want some juice?
Like,
he asked him for juice.
He's like, you want some juice? Like, like that's like the one time where like I'll look at like the abridged version of Dragon Ball and be like, yeah, I kind of wish Dragon Ball was more like the abridged version because I want Popo to show them the pecking order. Let me show him who's on top. But yeah, so they summoned Shenron, and they only made the wish to make them children, right? Like they didn't use all of the wishes.
No.
At least from what we saw.
Yeah.
So yeah, then they wished upon the Dragon Balls. They specifically mentioned to turn everybody into first graders, essentially. Uh-huh. And then what if they're already? And then Shenron's like, well, what if they're already like around that age? And they're like, what if they're already children? and Goma's sitting there and he's like, oh, you're a little specific, aren't you? Like you're all about your specifics. Yeah. And then they requested to turn, I guess, children into babies. So poor Goten and Trunks.
Yeah, they're not going to see much action.
Well, not just that, but like we just got off the tail end of Superhero where we finally see them age up and now they're back to younger than they've ever been before. Like
It's Charlie's birthday too. He
it was,
just turned 9.
he just turned 9. Now he's turning 1 for the second time. So
Yeah.
it's so crazy. But no, I think the first episode was really good all around.
Yeah.
I think I'm actually excited to see more. And I really hope that it continues with this momentum, because like I'm all for more world building and more character development. And I mean, if they're all becoming children, like it's gonna feel a lot more like OG Dragon Ball, I think. Which Dragon Ball used to be like an adventure series, not an action series. So the fact that we're kind of going back to those roots, I think is going to be a very it'll be an eye opener, I think, for a lot of people that aren't familiar with Dragon Ball. And it's definitely not going to be as like it'll be action packed, but it'll definitely be a bit more lighthearted. And I think that'll be a nice change of pace for a lot of people. I think, well, to have something not be taken so seriously. We don't have to worry about power levels and what do they call it in terms of like power scaling.
Yeah.
For a series like that. But yeah, I think we can end it there. I think there's not really much more to talk about with the first episode. We talked about Spark and Zero a little bit. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we kind of left?
Just kind of the follow up on the end of the episode. I think that this series, it's provided for me that even though this series was kind of the thing nobody wanted, they just wanted Super. I think it's going to be actually I was definitely over. My expectations weren't that high, but I think after watching this first episode, I've never watched a Dragon Ball episode where I was dying for more questions. Like specifically like the Shin background, like what's his family dynamic? His brother didn't even know he's a Supreme Kai. Where did they come from? How did Shin ascend versus his brother fall from grace?
That's actually a really good point, because like Shin was always a character that like I really didn't give two F's about at all.
Yeah.
Like we saw the little bit that we did in the beginning of like the Boo saga, and that was kind of it. We knew that. I mean, there's two things that I know about Shin, and like that I've always known about Shin, and it's that for the most part, he's useless. And two, no matter what piece of media like Shin is, he always has that smug ass face.
The show, the game, the cards.
Yeah, just everything. So yeah, I'd agree to that. This is probably the most interested I've ever been in Shin in my entire watching of Dragon Ball. Like, that's a good point.
I just think the storytelling is going to be leaps and bounds beyond what most Dragon Ball shows have given us.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty excited for future episodes and what it's going to bring.
And I guess to follow up on that too, like I know a lot of people and I think part of the problem with this, let me say what I'm going to say first. So there was a lot of discussion prior to the series releasing, that where everyone was saying that, oh, so we're going back to GT. And we're this is basically going to be GT 2.0. It's going to be the exact same thing. And I think whether or not you like GT or hate GT, or you're like somewhere in the middle of it, I think it's fun to have those types of conversations. I'm not going to tell people not to have conversations like that. But I think the biggest point of contention, I think, for me is that having watched GT and having seen how that starts versus how this starts, it is like night and day different. Mm-hmm. GT kind of threw you right into it right out the gate. Not a whole lot of build up, no sense of world building from that, because GT is 10 years after the end of Z. So so much time has passed. So you would think that you would see a bit more of the world building and character building where everyone's kind of is in a better light. Not necessarily thrown into the stakes right off the bat. The fact that because you can even look at the parallels too. Like GT had the Black Star Dragon Balls. and they mentioned the Black Star Dragon Balls. Okay, where did those come from?
Yeah.
We could assume that the original Namekian, with the old Kami Piccolo fusion before they split, was the one that made the Black Star Dragon Balls, but nothing was ever set in stone about who made those.
Yeah.
We could only ever assume that was the case because Piccolo died at the end of the Baby Saga. And he sacrificed himself because he didn't want those Dragon Balls to be used again, which which made no sense to me because they got a whole new set of Dragon Balls through Dende. Like that's a whole. I don't want to dive into it.
Let's not get into the GT hole right
Yeah,
now.
I don't want to dive down that hole. But like, whereas here, yes, we found out that there's another set of Dragon Balls somewhere in the overall scope of the universe, but we have context behind it. We know, there's a Namekian in the demon world that created it. We know the Namekians came from the demon world. So it would make sense that the demon world would have a new set of Dragon Balls like that. Like little things like that, like really stand out compared to like the opening of GT. So and that's just a small like aspect of it. So I think for people that are saying that this is going to be a GT 2.0, I would say if you are a enjoyer of the GT show, I would say that you're probably fine with how you're perceiving the show going into it. I wouldn't say that. I would say the adventure aspect is going to be a lot better in Daima than it ever was in the opening season of GT. So I think for GT enjoyers, I think the show is actually going to be a lot of fun. I would say to manage your expectations.
Yeah.
I know some people were saying that like, oh, they're going to reintroduce Super Saiyan 4, and I don't see how they would ever be able to do that in this story.
I don't think so either.
I mean, never say never, but I personally don't see it. I would say just temper your expectations and treat it like GT, but don't go in expecting GT. And then for people that are like negative detractors of GT, like I would say definitely give this a watch. It's definitely different than GT. It's starting off better than GT did, in my opinion. And I think that I think that you can actually gain a lot from watching this series as opposed to like any other Dragon Ball property that we know of at the moment. There's a lot of nuance here that we don't like. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know, and there's a big overall mystery behind it all, which I think is awesome. But it's not like you're going in and you're expecting more of the same. It's definitely very different from what they've done in the past.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool. So,
just give it a shot.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I think that's going to wrap up this particular episode of the podcast. This has been KamehaRadio. I have been your host, Alex, joined by David. Please consider hitting that subscribe button to follow up with us more. We're going to try and get these episodes out in a relatively decent fashion. We're going to try and get an episode out a week. I know every other week our schedules are a little different, so we'll have to kind of figure out like a good time period to kind of like record these and be able to put it out. So I would say like every week and a half, I think we'll have an episode out and kind of discuss like what the new stuff that's been kind of happening. But
I think that's fair.
Yep. So next episode, we'll discuss episode 2 of Daima, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about Fusion World because we didn't really talk much about Fusion World.
Yeah, a lot of new set coming out next month. A lot of new cards. Very excited. Gonna spend a lot of money on
it. Go broke.
Yep.
Go broke or go home.
Break the bank account.
So, but yeah, that'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you guys so much for listening in, and we will see you guys all in the next episode of KamehaRadio.
See ya.